Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Jim Cummings, an actor and filmmaker who's created a remarkable niche for himself in the last few years with his feature films Thunder Road and The Wolf of Snow Hollow, in which he plays overmatched authority figures who insist on pretending they're in control when their world is falling apart around them. Jim and his writing partner, PJ McCabe, take that character one step further in their brand new movie, The Beta Test, which casts Jim as Jordan, a Hollywood agent spiraling into paranoia once he's tempted by the promise of a no-strings sexual encounter. It's just come out on VOD, and it's great. You need to see it. Jim picked Zodiac, David Fincher's 2007 thriller focusing on the hunt for the serial killer who terrorized San Francisco in the late 1960s and early 70s, murdering at least 5 people and claiming to have killed dozens more. Fincher's narrative is framed through the eyes of 3 men whose lives are swallowed up by the investigation. Journalist Paul Avery, played by Robert Downey Jr., Police Inspector Dave Toschi, played by Mark Ruffalo, and cartoonist Robert Graysmith, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. But Fincher and his screenwriter James Vanderbilt make sure there's a 4th investigator as well. It's the camera, pulling us further and further into darkness. That's where the story is. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I think Zodiac is a masterpiece, and I think it is one of the most forensic, meticulously made narratives that falls into the detective genre, but it's so much larger than that. Like, that case of serial murder was a 30-year case, and if you're going to make a movie about a case that was that long, of course it has to be 3 hours. And it is so interesting to watch. It is so perfectly done. And all of the detective story in any research about the case is purposeful and so beautifully entwined cinematically to this film. And I think it does a few things for me. Obviously, the craftsmanship of the cinema is, beyond par. It is like one of the most perfect movies ever made, in my opinion, and Bong Joon-ho's opinion. I think really also it touches the surface of how fragile life is and how we take for granted how dangerous our neighbors can be, and that there are very scary people out there that aren't Michael Myers, that are a guy that works at an Ace Hardware who, when you show up, looks you in the face and recognizes you, even though he shouldn't, because you're just a cartoonist at a newspaper. And that's a dead giveaway that he's probably the guy who's been killing these people in the Bay Area. It's a chilling masterpiece, and I love it more than most movies. That's why I picked it.
And it gives me the opportunity to come out and say, the first time I saw it, I wasn't that crazy about it. I thought it was absorbing and well done, but it felt to me like, I don't know, this is such a weird thing to feel when you see a movie, but when it was over, I thought, I think you should have waited another couple of years. It felt like it was like, but then I realized later, and it took a while, and in a weird way, it's one of the few films where I feel like I failed it.
You should have waited a couple of years.
Yeah, but the point of the film is that it's about the time that passes and how there'll never be enough time and how there is no resolution. And I have gone back to it a number of times since then, and I don't know that I've ever been lulled into that headspace by a movie the same way, where it actually convinced me that I was misreading it, because the whole point of the film is about how people misread things.
It is funny. So I'll completely admit to that. I've been a terrible film student. And there have been times where I watched The Godfather the first time and was like impressed with the fun Italian wedding stuff. And then I didn't really get the whole point of it. And then it took me watching No Country for Old Men 1,000 times to then really go back and watch The Godfather and fall in love with it for its language. It's like speaking a different language and learning a language, really, of what the filmmaker is trying to say, and the relationship between the audience and the filmmaker. And Zodiac is like the pinnacle of that for me, of this dude, David, who lived in the Bay Area until he was about, 7, and then came back to work at Industrial Light and Magic. When he was leaving the Bay Area, was looking out the back window and said, I wonder if ever they caught that guy. I wonder if they ever caught that Zodiac guy. And so even for him, it was this unsolved mystery as a child, and then became so fascinated with serial murder. He's made, TV shows and movies about it, almost all of his films, basically. And I completely fall in line. It's so fascinating. It is like it's like a werewolf film where it's like there are these people among us who every once in a while go out of their way to harm their neighbors for their own sexual satisfaction or their own ego satisfaction. And it is so antithesis of what every other human being feels that it's shocking to the human spirit, I think. And it's so profound to watch and horrifying. The Lake Berryessa murder is just so wild and graphic and ugly and true. That's how it happened, probably. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's interesting that one of the best cinema artists of all time makes films about these guys who hold women down with knives and kills them. And it's unfortunate, it's nice to have filmmakers who are making much more peaceful, kind films, but it is fascinating to watch David work.
Yeah, he has a clear eye in exactly every way, right? Like he from that shot of the car traveling through San Francisco, which, it's so simple, right? It's a Panaglide, but and a crane, I think, at the time, because it wouldn't have been a drone. Now it's a drone shot and it's everywhere. But
that's actually all CG. The car driving through San Francisco is entirely
right, because they had to recreate the city as it was.
Yes, and also the movements weren't perfect enough for Dave in thinking about how you do it with a drone. And so the car, it seems as though the camera is strapped to the car, 200 feet up or whatever. And it's also a supposition of why he killed the taxi driver, because it's against his modus operandi and signature. He took a bit of the guy's clothes, so it was definitely a Zodiac murder, and sent it to the Chronicle. But they're thinking that he was being talked negatively about on the radio and then shot the guy, which is such a clever thing. I never would have thought of that. It would take the writers thinking about it for years to go, well, that's probably why he did it.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that's so fascinating too. In the absence of personal detail, like the film has to invent the Zodiac. I mean, I'm pretty sure the film wants it to be Arthur Lee Allen.
It's him.
That's where the story takes him.
There's no question. It's Arthur Lee Allen. There's no question. And not just that, the amount of, he says it at the end of the film. He's like, this is a case that goes over several different parts, like a million different counties in California, from NorCal to SoCal. The guy has been killing people for a long time. It's incredibly rare for one of the lead suspects, with all of these different pieces of evidence that tie him close to the victims and where they were at the time, would live 50 feet from the first victim. And then also, the movie doesn't go into it, but that wasn't the first victim. So John Douglas's book, The Cases That Haunt Us, goes into even more detail about Zodiac. It's a beautiful book. It has different coverage of different, like Jack the Ripper and stuff like that. It's fascinating. But there was a murder that took place on a college campus, where a woman was murdered on the football field. And then somebody scribbled something and left it, or sent a letter to the newspaper, I think. I might be getting that wrong, but I think that's right. And Arthur Lee Allen went to that college and was a student then. And then also he got a speeding ticket coming back from Lake Berryessa to his trailer park the night of the Lake Berryessa murder. And it's like, well, of course he was speeding. He had to go and kill people far away and then get home as quick as possible. And it's like, there's just way too many things that connect this guy to this place. And although there aren't fingerprints and there aren't handwriting things that connect him, or DNA, it's an amazing thing to do behavioral psychology and say, without a doubt, it is this person, and there's just there's nobody else. It had to be this guy.
Oh yeah, no, I don't doubt that the film thinks it's him. Like that's the reason
Yeah.
that we get the final scene. And
The end of the film.
I remember when Memento came out and people were insisting that the ending as the film is structured isn't a validation of Teddy's story. It's like, well, no, Teddy's just lying to him. It's like, no, it's at the end of the movie. It is telling you what the film feels.
That's the fulfillment. That's like, yeah, that is the artist being like, this is the payoff that you've been waiting for. Yeah. The other thing about that last scene in Zodiac, in the airport where they bring in the dude who gets shot, that actor's so good too.
Jimmy Simpson. Yeah.
That's right.
Future Westworld star.
That's right. And he gets brought in and he says that bit where he's like, yeah, that's him. That's probably him. I'm like 85% sure. And then he picks it up and looks at it and he says that line of like, I haven't seen this man's face since that night, basically. And it's this beautiful, and he goes, I am certain that this is the guy that shot me. It's a beautiful ending of the film. But the guy, the detective who's taking the notes, who hands out the photographs, is the detective who was working at, I want to say the Vallejo police station, where Jake Gyllenhaal can't take notes in the room, in the evidence room, and so he comes running out to run across the street to go to the diner and take the notes. And somebody goes, he goes, "Who's that?" And he goes, "Oh, it's Robert Graysmith. He's a reporter for the Chronicle. He's trying to solve Zodiac." And the guy goes, "Good for him." And it's this punchline. And then that's the guy who gets the testimony at the end of the film. Like the punchline in the middle of the movie is actually the most beautiful piece of evidence. And that is how most cases get solved. It's never this like one dude who goes out and solves the case. It's never the film noir version. It's this team of like incompetent people from 1,000 different counties that then it takes investigative journalists to piece it all together as to how the whole thing happened. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, was it the early 80s? Like the sort of the rudimentary, the facts-based version of the internet that the FBI used to just figure out where things were happening in multiple cities to suddenly understand patterns and stuff that had just not been possible to see because we didn't have that level of inter-office communication. Yeah.
The behavioral sciences division of the FBI, I mean, started in the 1970s. John Douglas was like one of the lead guys. And obviously that's what Mindhunter is based off of, his book. And then Bill Tench is not a real person, but he did have a partner to go and interview, all of these serial killers. But yeah, I mean, really, there was no way to track this stuff. And it was this, not an epidemic, but this thing that you could track as easily or as simply as hurricanes, where it's like within a certain population, when the economy starts to go down, these certain types of men get triggered and then end up killing people, usually women. And it's so graphic and so awful. I think that Mindhunter season 2 is probably the best piece of media ever made. Certainly the most well-crafted. And I think there's no way that he and his team could have made it without having done Zodiac as forensically as possible. But it is just, it's impossible and difficult to think about. Like I read John Douglas's book about BTK, and we all know him as Dennis Rader, and we see his picture and it's like, oh yeah, it's definitely him. But think about tracking that fucker for 30 years and all you have are crime scenes. All you have are the things that are left behind in this brutal, masturbatory rape murder situation. It's really graphic and awful. And these detectives are kind of, stuck with their hands in their pockets of like, well, I don't know, like, how am I supposed to solve this thing? It's really shocking that we're able to get anything at all. We're very lucky that DNA evidence and 23andMe are doing a good job putting these people behind bars.
Yeah. And the film, to keep bringing it, bouncing back to Zodiac, even though we could go off into Mindhunter or Seven or any of the other places that
Fincher, the Dragon Tattoo.
You're right. He's never really, like, even Panic Room is about a guy who ultimately will be a serial killer if he's not stopped in the Yoakum character.
Oh, he's great, man.
Nobody talks about Panic Room.
I love that movie so much. Even David. The first time I met Dave, we were at this house in New Orleans as a production assistant on Benjamin Button. And he was showing me clips from Zodiac, and he was showing me clips from Benjamin Button on his laptop. It was the first time I ever saw a 1 terabyte drive. And I said, Panic Room is one of my favorite movies. I watch it all the time. And he goes, oh, that fucking movie. And I'm like, it's crazy. Like, you're never satisfied. That movie's one of the most concise and like perfect films to make. And it's shocking that even the filmmakers are like, oh, I can only think about the problems that I was having on set. I cannot separate that struggle from the movie itself. It's crazy.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Soderbergh in like I want to say 2000 and it's when Che came out, so 2008. And we were talking about the first four films, which he basically, even Sex Lives, he doesn't like to talk about them. He doesn't like to revisit them. He basically, I was asking if we were ever going to get a decent DVD, I think, of King of the Hill. And he's like, I don't have time for it. And that and The Underneath. And he just keeps shit talking his early films and Kafka. And now he's gone back and revisited all of them. And yet Fincher still, like, there's no Blu-ray of Panic Room anywhere in the world. It's very frustrating. It's also, weird side anecdote, it was the first movie I saw in a theater with my wife, my future wife. We saw it on a date together almost 20 years ago.
I watched it with my mom all through high school because it's so terrifying. I mean, it's like, and then I think like the thing for him, this is what I gleaned from the conversation, was that it was too much like Cape Fear, and that it spoke too panderingly, or it worked too panderingly to white America, that it was like home intrusion movies are just too much speaking to white women and making them scared. And that's an easy audience to hit, basically. And so like, but I mean, it's kind of true, but I mean, but it's a masterpiece. It's probably the best of the genre in a crazy way, and elevates the genre in so many different ways. David Koech's writing is unbelievable. The scene with the Coca-Cola and the pizza with almost no dialogue is one of my favorite scenes in any movie. I always cite that to like future screenwriters to be like, oh yeah, you can make movies like this. You don't have to say too much. It's funny. We're like, and that one is so contained and focused entirely on performance. I fucking love that guy. David Fincher is so talented. It's insane. It's like God tier filmmaking. And I don't know why that kind of craftsmanship is absent from the majority of other films that I see.
I think the monomaniacal insistence on getting it right. Like, there are not a lot of directors who are willing to push the way that Fincher does.
Yeah.
And you're making a face that tells me,
oh my God, dude, he's my favorite. But he doesn't do many interviews, but when he does, he's always talking about that, of like, people make fun of me because I'll do 100 takes of a scene. And then he goes like, with all of the other work that goes into this stuff, all of the entire team that builds the sets, that does the wardrobes, that shows up at 5 a.m, that locks down the street, that does all this stuff. And I'm nervous that some celebrity isn't going to get enough sleep that night, or that they're hungover. It's like, I'm not going to cut around your hangover. Like, we gotta make the scene. You gotta do your job, you know? And it's really funny to hear him talk like unflinchingly about doing movies like that. And it's really funny. He actually lambasted Jake Gyllenhaal so Jake Gyllenhaal was also coming out with Jarhead when they were shooting Zodiac. And he has this interview, I think it's for GQ, but he says like Jake was on like the precipice of getting nominated for Best Actor for Jarhead. And so all of his managers and agents were trying to like puff him up to be like, oh, we got to do this press tour for this movie. And he's like, no, you're the main character of Zodiac. You got to focus on this thing. And then Jake had to apologize to David, be like, I don't know what I was thinking. I got sucked up in this Hollywood bullshit. Let's make this movie as perfect as possible. I think he's great in the movie. I think he's like one of my favorite characters in cinema.
Is wonderful. And that's what I mean about Fincher. It's like, if there are 100 takes of Jake Gyllenhaal looking at a piece of paper, I want to see them. I want to see all the takes of Downey at the bar. I want to see all the little variations, all the little moments. I want to understand why he picked the takes that made it into the movie, because there is like, that's what I mean. He moves with purpose. His films are sharks. They have like,
that's exactly right.
He finds a single direction out of all of this possibility that he creates in the first place, which we just did an episode on Secrets and Lies, I think last week actually is when it will have come out. And, you know, Mike Leigh's process is that he improvises with his actors for 6 months, then writes the script based on what they give him and finds the way through, right? Like the perfect narrative. Fincher does it on the set. Fincher does it in previs and in post. And I assume he labors over the scripts with his writers just as much, but by the time the printed page is ready, that's like, you know, Hitchcock used to say that once he wrote and storyboarded a film, it was over. He would get bored during the shoots because he knew what was going to happen, and there was no surprise.
You just have to execute the thing. I'm not surprised by that. It's funny, even watching something like Jamaica Inn, it's so edited before they shot it. So like, and obviously Charles Lawton's a director as well, and a great comic actor, and he's playing the bad guy in the movie. But like the camera is based off of his biology. They just kind of like float around with this guy, knowing that he's going to be this bombastic, goofy villain. And it's so edited. All of his films, or even in the 1930s, are incredibly edited before they shoot. And I haven't seen that kind of craftsmanship. It's almost absent from modern independent filmmaking or filmmaking in general, where it's like, oh, we'll set up some shots and we'll find it on the day. And my kind of filmmaking, the way that we make movies, is we write the script out loud so that it's like organic, coming out of human vocal cords, kind of stealing that from Mike Leigh. And then we do a podcast of it just like this, and I'll play all of the parts and put in music and sound design so that the movie is kind of done in audio format and everybody understands where the punchlines are and how long the awkward pauses should be. I always say, like, English and language and comedy are so complex that an actor reading a script might completely miss the point. And we don't have the kind of budget or the time to show up on set with people not getting it. So it becomes this great base layer so that when we all show up on set, we know what we're doing and we can kind of speak the language of the movie more so than just reading the script will allow. I think that kind of filmmaking is very important, and I suggest doing it like that. I mean, Bong Joon-ho storyboarded all of Parasite. And then people were like, well, how, you're line reading for your actors and doing these podcasts. And it's like, well, you're telling them where to stand and what clothes to wear. And like, it's their job to elevate it. It's their job to make it seem natural. But there's very little freedom that we have on our sets. David gives his actors an incredible amount of freedom by doing hours and hours of rehearsal and finding the thing. It's crazy.
Yeah, I had no idea you did the audio thing. That's such a fascinating, because it's the opposite of previs. Right, like it's pre-sound, it's pre-rhythm. I get it. I totally understand. It's the
cheapest way I know how to do it. Like, I know how to do podcasts. I'm a terrible artist. I'm a terrible drawer. I'm a terrible filmmaker, but like, I'm a good editor. And so I know, like, if I can record it on the voice memo app on my phone, and like do it in a closet, and I can play all the parts, I can realize where the script sucks and where it needs to be shortened, or two scenes combined or something, in a way that just by reading it in my mind's eye on a laptop in a screenplay format is not the same. And doing it out loud can tell you when the audience is going to get bored so much quicker and so much easier. And so we've done it for all three of my features, and I think that's kind of the only reason why it feels so crafted, our movies.
That's amazing. Do you ever discover new lines or new angles when you do that?
And then when we write the script out loud. So it's like me and PJ acting out every scene, or me in the basement, PJ's basement, drinking Budweiser, doing the Thunder Road scenes, pretending to be a 9-year-old girl and like having a conversation with myself as the dad. It's insane. It's really goofy to hear too. But when you're doing it out loud, you can find by accident through improv turns of phrase or just simplicity or like a facial expression that will get across the idea in a way that, if you're going to do a lot of screenwriting, it can become very verbose and you're trying to get these ideas across. And sometimes it's much better to just be subtle.
Yeah. Cause I mean, I can think of the way your face flickers in the beta test at numerous points, but especially at the very beginning with the little card where the only words that we can really see are face sitting. I laughed so hard, and it is such an unexpected little sting in that moment of just like the fact, what is it, like 2 seconds where you filter through desire, attraction, and guilt.
Yeah,
like just that's immediately, right. And the way that Jordan is constantly exploding and apologizing at people. Yeah, even though
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
but he knows he's in the wrong. Yeah, and the facade of like, I'm a tough guy, and then I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shout at you. I'm not violent. It's very important. I think that's like one of the strengths that we have, is that we have 24-hour access as screenwriters to the lead actor, and so like I'm able to make the scenes function. So like when Jacqueline, no spoilers, but Jacqueline comes into my office, she's my assistant, and the scene is going a certain way. It seems a bit flirtatious. It seems like it's going to be this kind of Weinstein power dynamic between a female assistant and the male boss. Mm-hmm. And then halfway through the scene, she says something that makes it sound like she understands that I'm having an affair and is reading my mail. And she does it kind of covertly. And it completely changes the scene. And the audience is like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. She asks if you're in a good mood. Did your wife sit on your face this morning? And she would only know that if she had read my mail, which is really funny and terrifying, and speaks to the larger problem in Hollywood or the larger great thing in Hollywood of the powers that be not having power anymore, and the assistants finally having power, which is important. Yeah. But to do that in that sequence, all it takes is me squinting my eyes a bit and like my eyebrows are so big and dark that it changes the entire emotion of my face. I have this kind of like elastic face that can convey, you know, many different emotions. So when she leaves the room, I just kind of squint a bit, and then the audience is like, oh, he's thinking about that. And it's funny. And you can hold at the end of a scene of just watching someone think about something. And it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the momentum carries us through it, right? Like we're watching to see what will happen next. And if all he's doing is going into his brain for a second, then that breaks the tension, and it's really fun.
Yeah, you get to see the cogs working a bit. One of my favorite comic actors is Steve Coogan, and he plays a character called Alan Partridge.
Oh, yeah.
And it's amazing to watch him work. I mean, all the comedy is so forensic. That's what he calls it, forensic comedy. But it's so perfect the way he's able to say something with only a few words. There's such amazing word economy with that writing. But it tells an entire story. One of my favorite jokes is in Alan Partridge, Alpha Papa, where the kidnapper, the guy who is holding everybody hostage, Pat Farrell, has his shotgun, and he's kind of the sad guy, and he lost his wife. And he goes, yeah, this is my wife. Here's a photograph of her. This was 3 months before the angels carried her to heaven. And you never see the photograph, but he holds it up, and Alan goes, must have been a couple of them.
Yeah.
And hands it out. And it's amazing. It's just it's a fat joke, but it's just, it paints a picture in the audience's mind, and you don't need to see the picture. It's just this. You're forced to become a detective, and that's so much more fulfilling in comedy, of like making the audience the people that have to understand the innuendo on their own. It's really fun.
Well, the beta test does have a mystery, and we're sort of encouraged to ride along while it's explored. But I don't even want to talk about this because it'll blow the experience for the audience. But the sense of menace that gathers around it.
It is purposeful. Like Zodiac starts with this very graphic murder in a car, and it's cool and scary and sets the tone for the rest of the movie, while also keeping the audience on their toes a bit, where they know more of these are coming, and they might be coming for the main characters. And so it kind of creates this ticking clock a bit. It's the Touch of Evil opening, where it's like the guy plants a bomb in a trunk, and then the audience is tense for the next 5 minutes until it goes off. We're stealing that kind of from the tapestry of cinema and like where that's worked before. But it was a lot of fun to shoot that scene. It's like, I don't act in it. It's one of the only scenes in the movie where like PJ and I just got to pretend to be David Fincher for a night. It was great.
And Zodiac is, again, same
Not
thing,
blood.
right? No blood at all.
Yeah, the Berryessa stabbings is a fake knife. I think it's probably the same thing. Probably had a hilt and then a synthetic. I mean, they probably have a higher VFX budget for those movies than we do. But yeah, the majority of the blood in that is fake. And I forget why. There was a good reason.
He didn't want to bother with costume changes.
That's what it was.
That simple, that he knew he was going to do multiple takes, and he just didn't want to have to clean everybody up every time.
Wow. And that was 2007, and he still made it look incredible. I had no idea there was no fake blood. Yeah, it's incredible what you can do. And that's why it's so tragic with the Rust shooting of like, why the fuck did they have bullets on set? Like, why it takes 30 seconds. I did the gunshots in the beta test. It's a fake gun. And then all it took was me doing a couple muzzle flashes and then sound effects for the gun. And then on Wolf is No Hollow, on all of our films, it's like pellet guns. It's crazy. And I hope that the industry changes to finally appreciate this safety net that we have that are VFX artists.
Yeah, I agree. It's watching the speculation roll out and the news cycle needing to be fed. That's, I think,
it's so awful too. And it's like all the conspiracy theorist stuff, and then like the armorers, defense attorneys who are doing their job of replacing blame and misleading and all of that stuff, which is normal for defense attorneys. That's their fucking job. Mm-hmm. But then you see people sharing it on social media, and it's like, I have this line in The Wolf is No Hollow, my second movie, where I say, hey, Dean, you got to get your wife to stop posting that shit on Facebook. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She has none of the evidence. She's trying to be a digital sleuth, and she's an idiot. And it's like, so often I want to say that when I see these things pop up in the media. It's like, this is a crime scene. This is a very complicated crime scene. You're not going to nail it for clickbait. You're not going to get it right now. You have almost none of the evidence. And truth is almost always stranger than fiction. And, information will come out in the next 5 months during the trial, I'm sure. And then everybody will be like, oh, finally, now I know what happened, instead of reading the Salon article about, problems with film sets and Alec Baldwin or whatever. It's awful.
Yeah. Which actually brings us back to Graysmith in a bizarre way. Like, here is a guy who had none of that. He didn't have the training. He didn't have the resources. He had some access, but not enough. He just liked puzzles and he wouldn't stop.
Yeah, it's interesting when you catch the bug, especially with serial murder, where it's like the ultimate whodunit, and there are clear answers. They're not, these people aren't trying to solve like, DuPont Chemical and how Teflon got renamed and they're still poisoning people. It's never that. It's like, how do we find the wolf? How do we find this person who's harming people in our neighborhood? And there is great satisfaction when you bring any of these people down. But yeah, I mean, Robert was such a weird guy. He was just like this goofy dude who loved puzzles, had no business solving a federal crime. But it sometimes takes someone with an non-overlapping skill set to come in and shake things loose. And I mean, that's kind of what the Innocence Project does now, where it's people who are retired with spare time. The people that cracked the code was a retired couple, the Zodiac ciphers, and found out the language. They were just people. Like, it kind of takes a village in some circumstances. And that's one of the things that I love so much about this movie. It goes into detail about that, where like cops, for the most part, are incompetent. They got into it because they like, these hero figures like Batman or
well, these days it's the Punisher.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is sort of a misreading, but yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's funny though, when I was interviewing cops for Thunder Road, they would say, "Hey, you're the movie man, huh? Okay, cool. You're the movie man. What kind of movies you like?" And I was like, "Oh, I like Terrence Malick movies and Alfonso Cuarón. What kind of movies do you like?" And they would go, "Man, you put me on the spot. Fast and Furious, Batman, Avengers." And there was always like these movies with these heroic people that drove cars very fast. It's funny with the majority of these people are not very well set to solve a crime like this. Yeah. And I'm sorry. My brain is still screaming that I have to make the connection. Like, Mark Ruffalo played that guy in the Dark Waters movie about the Teflon. He's in this too. It all comes back to Zodiac, and the absurdity too of what is this? A movie where Iron Man, the Hulk, and Mysterio work to catch a serial killer.
I completely forgot. My God, the cinematic universe. That's really funny.
It hit me about halfway through the last time I watched it. It's just like, oh, of course. They're all everywhere. They're like, and that's what Marvel does. It just absorbs actors. But
but I think that's the beauty of David too, of like kidnapping Brad Pitt for a minute and making movies with him, where he's like the biggest star in the world, but then they have the same sense of humor. And like, they're like, cool, we're going to make this movie. It'll be a beautiful love letter to my dad. And we'll call it Benjamin Button and mortality. And, and then with Seven, it's like, he plays such the comic relief moron, brute, who ends up fulfilling the prophecy that the bad guy wants. I think like that is why David is so good. He turns celebrities into normal people and turns normal people into celebrities.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. I mean, certainly he saw something in John Carroll Lynch that no one else ever had.
He also kind of looks like Arthur Lee Allen. I don't know if you've seen the interviews with Arthur. There's interviews on YouTube where some local newscaster went and interviewed him in his home. And I think there's 2 interviews with Arthur Lee Allen while he was still alive. And they're pretty shocking. He seems incredibly pedestrian. And he's like, yeah, I've been accused of this thing. And like, it's difficult for me to live in this neighborhood. And it's like him walking around in his backyard. And the whole time it's like, it's that shtick that a serial killer pulls off of like, I'm going to engage with the press. And then I'm going to go home, the telltale heart thing of like really loving this ego trip that he's convincing people that he's not this person and playing the victim. It's wild.
No, I haven't seen them. I'm a little nervous too now.
I've seen them all. It's bad. I've seen like every serial killer interview because we were researching The Wolf of Snow Hollow, and it's about serial murder in America. And so I read all of John Douglas's books, and I watched all these interrogation videos of like, Colonel Russell Williams in Canada, and just how these dudes perform and who they are. And it's really hypnotizing. I feel a bit like Graysmith a bit when I was researching that stuff, of like, I knew all of the details, all the gory stuff, and it goes beyond, like a macabre desire or like an interest. It's like, you have to know everything. You have to understand how this thing works, because it's so foreign to how we think about our lives. And it can often remind us of how lucky we have it, not being around these people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit older, and I got on the John Douglas train right after Red Dragon was published, and it came out that he was the inspiration for Will Graham, even though, Thomas Harris took massive liberties with his story. But the Elliot Layton's Hunting Humans had come out around the same time. I think I was in university, so it would have been the late 80s that was around. And it is incredibly compelling reading, right? Like the idea of a completely aberrant psychology that you cannot connect to in any way, that doesn't see other humans as humans. You must have read Tim Cahill's book. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That was the first time I'd experienced it as narrative in a way. Like he really gives voice to everything. And I feel like now what we're seeing is the fascination in a whole new generation, not Fincher, obviously. He's I think a couple of years older than me, but the audience for these shows. Suddenly true crime is everywhere because it's sort of seductive and relatable. And Michaela Watkins had this great line on the unicorn, just thrown out of nowhere. It's like, why do women listen to true crime? It's just what we do. And I've also seen it posited that it's instructive in a horrible way, right? Sure, like you're learning how not to get caught.
Oh, that's interesting. So with women, like Hitchcock talked about that a lot. And there's scenes in like the opening of Frenzy and in Strangers on a Train where like you see women interacting with the macabre and like how scary killers are. And isn't that interesting as this kind of light society stuff, a fascination. And it's funny that he's doing it where he's like, these people are coming about it in such, they seem like simpletons. They seem like they don't really understand how graphic and awful the thing that they're interested in is. That's why I really love the ending of Mindhunter season 1, when he's hanging out with, he goes to the hospital and visits what's his face, the tall guy. I'm spacing on his name, Ed Kemper.
Oh, right.
Edmund Kemper, and the officer leaves, and he's alone in the room with him, and then he stands up to his full height, and then kind of corners him, and he's like, "Oh, he's gonna kill me. This is it." And like the whole time, we've kind of been lulled into this calm state that dealing with serial killers is a safe matter, or that getting interested in the subject is safe, and it's not true. And as soon as you really become close to the matter, it's incredibly graphic and ugly and not fun and not cool. And I'm very glad I stopped working on The Wolf of Snow Hollow when I did, because I got a little too close to the precipice, and I don't know if I'll engage with the material again.
Yeah, I think the attraction on one level is that someone is dead and you can get answers.
Justice pornography.
Yeah. But the thing that everyone forgets is that in almost all of these unsolved murders, the implication is that the killer is still alive. So you're not safe. No one is safe investigating these things, like psychologically, because if the point is the fascination with the unknown is waiting for you to come to look at magazines in your basement, the way Fleischer has that moment. Even though he's not the Zodiac, we are allowed to be just as freaked out as Graysmith is in that basement scene, which is just so. I remember seeing that with an audience the first time and watching people. You know the story about Polanski hiding
the phone, and leaning over,
just but actually having the actor behind. Ruth Gordon was behind the door in that shot. We never see her, but
she's on the phone.
It's just supposed to make the audience lean. And I got to watch an entire room full of people squirm because they couldn't tell where to be afraid of, what part of the frame.
Okay, cool. I love that scene in Rosemary's Baby, because Ruth Gordon is so compelling. She calls Saperstein and says like, and we're not going to pay any of your fancy Hollywood prices either. It's such a great line. I love that character so much. Minnie Castevet is one of my favorite characters. I feel like I'm always impersonating her whenever I'm writing for some characters. Anyway, But yeah, I think that's another thing. That scene of Robert Graysmith going down in the basement and getting spooked. It's the same thing. It's like we get too close to the thing, and it's not fun anymore. It's actually frightening. And yeah, it's weird. We're like, there is this thing that speaks to all of us individually, of like listening to Colonel Russell Williams' testimony or interrogation. It's a beautiful interview. If you haven't seen it, it's 3 hours, and it seems like it's a guy coming out of the closet, but he's this like Air Force veteran colonel in the Canadian Air Force who's killed multiple women, and it's awful, and he's the worst guy in the world. But to hear him talk, he's like, put on their clothes. He's probably, trans, and then couldn't do that in the Air Force. And he says, like, the first victim, I was walking my dog in the neighborhood, and she didn't have her blinds down. She was running on the treadmill. And immediately I'm like, cool, we got to get blinds for my house because my fiance can't be, she can't be wearing exercise clothes inside. Like you immediately change the way you think about the world because of your neighbors. And statistically, Toschi says it in the movie, Mark Ruffalo's character, where he's like, guys, how many people have been killed by gun violence in San Francisco? I was like, this guy killed 8 people. Like that happened over the last month or 2 weeks in San Francisco. Like maybe we should reanalyze kind of how scared we should be about these people that might keep us in our basement, instead worry about someone with a handgun who doesn't like the way that you park.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's all about risk assessment. God, the last year and a half has taught me almost everything about risk assessment is flawed. Just watching people go out and make mistakes and do things. I mean, I'm sure I have too, but I get to judge everybody else. That's how this works. but somebody said, I wish I could remember who it was because it's really trenchant and clever. After 9/11, is when you get CSI and Criminal Minds and all of this programming designed to tell you that you should stay home because the world is too scary. And always situated in like not CSI because it was in Vegas, but all the Criminal Minds stuff is set in suburban situations in generic America, telling people that there are monsters next door all the time.
Yeah. Oh, what's that one where the guy comes back, Homeland, and it's like it's so toxic and pandering and awful and not true. And same thing with Argo. Like Argo, I hate it because it was like nothing against the team and nothing against Alan Arkin, but the moral of that story is Muslims are the bad guys and Hollywood saves the day. And it's like, really, that's that we're still, and then it wins Best Picture. It's like I feel like those kinds of filmmaking speak to what the basest desires of humanity is in America. And it can sometimes just be incredibly detestable, just as bad as the problem itself.
Yeah. I mean, that is sort of the media specialty, right? Like we speaking as a film critic, not a news reporter, but we certainly jump on things to make them more vivid than they need to be sometimes, and end up perpetuating whatever the problem is just by saying, pay attention to this, look, it's here. And that generates the need for more stories and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It never ends. It's a feedback loop.
Yep. That's exactly right. Echo chamber feedback loop.
Yeah. But you get some decent people. I mean, here and there. I have to hope. I have to believe. I'm trying to I don't know how you get out of it. I don't know how you break things. It's like Tachi's frustration. He is chasing one guy who is terrorizing a city and doing its best to hold San Francisco hostage with the letters and the campaigns, but other people are doing terrible things all around him, and he's getting turned into Dirty Harry, right? Like that's the other thing that's where the media takes it.
Yeah, there is this Jaws problem that comes up with law enforcement where the victims' families come out. We have it in Wolf is No Hollow and they have it in Jaws, but that bit of like, how come you haven't caught this thing yet? Mm-hmm. And it's so difficult, and you have to kind of, I mean, it is really difficult. I've witnessed it firsthand. There was a case that I became fascinated with and befriended the families in Alabama. It was a 5-time astronaut that was drunk the second time driving, a second DUI, and he killed 2 girls.
I know the story.
Jim Halsell. It's awful. And it was interesting where it's been 5 years before the trial where he got sentenced. And so he's been out and had 5 Christmases with his families, and the victims' families didn't have that, robbed of that. And so the victims' families are calling me and they're calling the district attorney, and they're just like, how do we get this guy in prison? Like, what is going on? Like, why is it taking so long? And it's difficult to explain. It's 1,000 different legal, red tape, bureaucratic bullshit that you have to go through. And then the district attorney is getting all this heat from everybody, where it's like his election's coming back up. And it's like, I got to get this guy in prison now, and we have to find out how to do it. And it's all very messy. It's never how you think it's going to be. Yeah, I mean, to catch BTK, it took 30 years. And it was only because they had DNA evidence and realized that they could use that against him because they had so much of his DNA on the crime scenes. And then his daughter went to his school and she had a pap smear and they had saved her DNA and they could track it through there, which is an insane thing. But it's never police work that catches the guy. It's like a very difficult, heavy thinking that goes into from an entire community. I'm glad the internet's around. I think it's going to be much harder to be a serial killer in the future.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what even the next 5 years brings in terms of advancements and tracking. And God, now we know where everybody is at all times too. That's going to make things easier to catch people doing horrible things that don't know to turn off their phones.
That's it. Yeah. There's a podcast, To Live and Die in LA. It's amazing. It's Neil Strauss's podcast. But one of the things that they did was they got into the main suspect's Google account, and that tracks where you are basically at all times. And so like, although he was saying he was somewhere else, he was right near where the body was found. And it's like, well, there you go. You're the killer. Really interesting.
That's amazing. I just upgraded my phone this week because I finally had to, and I paired it with my old smartwatch. And the new phone has just enough new tech on it that it just started initiating Google Fit on my watch. And I'm like, I don't exercise that much. I don't need to worry about it. And then it just popped up. You're 5'11" and 176 pounds. It's like, you're a watch. How do you know this? I don't.
It knows everything. Norm, we're going to have to stop killing people. I think.
Well, I think. I mean, it's what gets the tension out. God rest Norm Macdonald's soul. That amazing bit,
dude. He's unbelievable, man. He's so good, and his entire coverage of the O.J. Simpson trial on Saturday Night Live is amazing. Basically, the punchline of every joke that he made about O.J. Simpson was that he was absolutely the murderer, and it's true. It's not 30 years before its time, but it's true.
Unassailable. Yeah, it's. I'm trying to come up with a way to bring this back to the beta test so we can get out. But we've covered Wolf of Snow Hollow so much that, I mean, it really is the more relevant title. Yeah. But as far as the beta test, what can we talk about without giving anything away?
I feel like with beta test, we stole so much of the murder narrative structure that Zodiac has, where you open it with a murder and then you populate the rest of the scenes with sporadic murders throughout to keep the audience tense. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the film, there's a tease that I'm probably going to get stabbed in the neck with a set of scissors. And that was all Zodiac. That was all us stealing the detective engine and the tension that David set up, or the screenwriter set up for that script. And yeah, it works. It's odd to say our movie is like an out and out laugh out loud comedy, but it still does work to keep the audience at the edge of their seat.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I thought of while I was watching it was Cure.
Dude,
you've seen it? Yeah,
I fucking love that movie so much. So basically the end of Cure is the detective shooting a dude in the face on the ground a whole lot. No spoilers, sorry. Movie came out 30 years ago or whatever. But I love that movie so much. To watch somebody purposely dodge getting hypnotized by a bad guy is so fulfilling to watch. It's great. I love that movie so much.
I'm glad I caught that. I mean, I felt it. It's just, and it's on, for anybody listening, it has just reemerged. It's on the Criterion channel. Please watch Cure. It was my Halloween recommendation this year because I'm so glad it's back in circulation. Yeah, I definitely, I'm so glad I was right about that.
Yeah. And he also has a new movie out. It's on Mubi. It's like
Wife of a Spy.
That's right. It's a romance,
yeah, it's good.
Right?
It's good.
Okay,
it's
cool.
World War II espionage romance thing. Wow. I don't want to discuss that any further, but it is out there.
But it's so funny. Every time I see a trailer for any of his work, it says, from the master of J horror comes this romance film. And it's really great. I love that pivot. I love that somebody, after making movies in the horror genre for many years, it's being celebrated worldwide, is now like, I want to make lovely movies. And that's fine too.
Yeah, he's in this, I think I called it a post-genre career at one point, but
that's great.
He'll come back and he'll deliver something that's that's so horrifying that nobody can get out of it. And it's going to be great. I'm there for it.
I think so too. I love that. Like, I think it takes that. Somebody leaves the genre for a minute and then they're like, I'm pissed off at how the genre is being represented. I'm just going to make the best goddamn movie you can imagine. I think it speaks to male ego, but that is an ambition that I have of making other lovely movies and then coming back because the kids aren't doing it right.
I want to see that. It's like Bong is going to do another Memories of Murder at some point, and it'll just be,
can't wait.
Exquisite torment. Yeah.
And I haven't been fulfilled by other stuff in the Korean murder genre yet. I got to see that. They caught the guy. They caught that killer.
Yeah. They deal with it on the Criterion edition of Memories. Cool. They sort of have to acknowledge that, the film's, the ambiguity is gone, but it's still one of the most perfect endings I've ever seen in the genre.
He was in prison, right? They did a DNA test.
He was already in prison for something else. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what happens. John Douglas says this, I'm sure you know that, but the three most common ways for serial killer to retire is they are in prison for something else, suicide, or lack of libido, which happened with the Golden State Killer. He aged out of it, which is insane.
Yeah, it's, again, the psychology of this stuff it's absolutely fascinating. You learn so much more about yourself investigating it, and then you never want to open those books again.
I think it's really taught me a lot about psychographics and like psychoanalysis of how when you can do a deep dive into a serial killer and you can build a profile about who these dudes are, who they probably are from a crime scene, you can do the same thing with everything else in your life. And I think watching something like Zodiac and doing investigative research about who this one person possibly could be helped me to build audiences for our films. So it's like with Thunder Road, I was then primed to be like, cool, this movie makes people laugh and cry at the same time. We should be reaching out to adults who like Pixar because they're not going to it for the animation. They're going to it for the heartbreak and the comedy. And it really does create this wedge in your mind that is a consciousness raiser to make you think more about yourself and how we all fit into the world. And it's crazy that it takes the darkest subject in human history to wake people up from it.
My thanks to Jim Cummings, whose new movie, The Beta Test, is on VOD right now in the US and Canada. Thanks also to Ali Lemaire-Shedden. She knows what she did. You can find Jim on Twitter at JimmyC, that's me, all one word. And you can find Zodiac on Blu-ray and DVD from Paramount Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on Netflix, Amazon, and the Criterion Channel, and available on the VOD platform of your choice. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I host the Now What podcast every Friday, in addition to writing far too many words about movies and television. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Watch movies, stay safe, wear a mask if you go out, get your shot already. I'll see you next time.